Good morning, everyone. It's 10:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I see some folks still trickling in here, but we're going to get started for sake of time. This is Kane Adams. I'm VP of National Accounts for NAU Country here. I'm going to talk to you today about ECO and SCO, talk little bit about the details. Both these products have been around for quite some time, so we're not going to spend a great deal of time today on the details of the policy. We're going to spend a little bit more time on the what and why, how these products work, how they will affect your producers' bottom lines here in this coming year. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Before we get into some of that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the history of these two products and show you some numbers. The reason why this is becoming a bigger and bigger deal every year, and you can see on the chart here, almost $345 million of SCO was sold last year. Amazing amount of growth in this product over the last 5 years. You can see in the bottom left here the top 5 states that sold SCO in this past in 2022. North Dakota leading the way with almost $87.5 million of premium, in Illinois, Indiana, South Dakota, and Iowa. So some amazing growth in this product. I'd see this product continuing to grow as we see these prices at such a high level, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. Since we're coming up on wheat sales closing date, I'm gonna focus most of the time today on wheat. Show you the tools that we have available to demonstrate these products to your producers, show them what the opportunities are. But here's a look at wheat for SCO over the last 5 years. You can see in 2022 a huge jump in wheat SCO sold in the past year. And then you can see the top 5 states that sold wheat. North Dakota carrying the big chunk of that this past year. But you can see the rest of the list there: Montana, Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma. And once again, with prices, as we'll talk about here in a few minutes, you're going to see a lot of SCO sold this next year. And so it's important to know what this product does, how it works, and how you can demonstrate that to your producers. Looking at ECO here, ECO's been around for 2 years. You can see a pretty big jump in premium over the last between 21 and 22, but quite a bit of ECO was sold this last year. As you can see, the top 5 states in the bottom right-hand corner here. Iowa leading the way with $44.5 million of premium, North Dakota, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. And kind of what we expected with ECO a little bit this last year is most of the premium was sold in the Midwest Corn Belt, where it's affordable to purchase an 85% policy in some of those states. And so you see that trend, and I expect that to continue going forward. But we'll talk a little bit more about what those prices will do for us in the future here. Looking at wheat specifically, the first year wheat, there wasn't a whole lot of ECO sold. This last year, a huge jump in premium on ECO, almost $28 million sold here this past year. And then you can see the top 5 states, again, North Dakota. Those guys really got after ECO this last year. Montana, Washington, Kansas, and South Dakota. And so we'll see a lot of ECO and what this means to the producers and why these products are so attractive. We'll talk about that here as we go through the morning. Before we get into a little bit more of the details of the products, we're going to talk more about the prices. Here is the current winter wheat base price, projected prices, averaging periods. As you can see, we're a little bit over halfway through the averaging period. The southern soft wheat for our southern folks, 824. The hard red winter wheat, 865. So huge numbers, huge opportunity for producers as we go into this next year. I did want to give a little shout out that this report comes from Rich's market report. And every day he puts this out there. You can click on it, get an updated list of what's going on with projected prices. And so I do want to give you a shout out to that. If you're not receiving Rich's stuff, I encourage you to get signed up because fantastic information out there for you as well. But again, it's a huge opportunity for these producers this year as we talk about these prices. You know, we've been through this last year of the Ukraine-Russia war when it comes to wheat and what that looks like over the last several days, last week or so. They have allowed Ukraine to ship out some wheat, and so that's affected the market a little bit. But again, we're still looking at an opportunity for wheat producers to lock in some extremely high price levels and possibly and potentially lock in some profit levels for those producers as well. And so we're going to talk about how ECO and SCO work with those two products going forward. Taking a look at the charts here, just a little look at the 23 July Kansas City wheat chart. You can see where we've been trading here over the last several months. Back here in the late spring when the Ukraine-Russia war really got heavy and the markets really got crazy with wheat. And then we've kind of settled back down, been fairly even over the last couple months. But as we're into this projected price period, you can see where 22 was, where the 2022 projected price was at 708. Currently, as I showed you, this top green line, we're sitting at 865 for the current average. And so a huge increase in what that revenue protection is going to be for those producers on wheat this year. I also threw in here, as we talk about ECO and SCO today, where those price triggers would fall on that 865 price. And so this blue line here, this is your 95% trigger. That would be for your ECO policy at 95%. $8.22 is where they could set their price trigger for ECO. So a huge opportunity there. And if you look at SCO at 86%, where that price would trigger at $7.44. So again, a huge increase over last year and a tremendous opportunity for our producers as we look at wheat coming in. Looking at the July 23 Chicago wheat chart, this is for our southern producers. You can see where last year we were at $7.14 here on this orange line. Current average today is $8.24, so over a dollar increase right now as we go into this next, I think, 10 days of averaging that we have available. That 95% trigger would be at $7.83, this blue line here. And then the 86% trigger would be at $7.09. So still tremendous opportunity for those producers as we go into this next year, looking at where they could possibly set a price floor on their wheat that they're going to grow this next year. I did want to throw in some corn and soybean charts here. This is for 23 corn. We're a long ways away from what that looks like in the averaging periods next winter. But I wanted to throw these out there just to show you where we're at compared to where last year's prices were. Last year we set a base price, a projected price at $5.90. And then the other thing I wanted to point out here is that the margin protection price last year that's being set currently as well on corn and soybeans was set at $5.06. And so a tremendous opportunity. Last week, Rich did a tremendous job on our Country Connections call talking about margin protection. But I did want to throw that out that where we're sitting for our averaging prices for margin protection over a dollar higher on corn than where we were last year, and same thing with soybeans at $13.57. So you can see the soybean chart here, where last year we were at $12.56 for the margin protection policy. So if you weren't able to make that meeting last week, I encourage you to watch the recording. It's out on our YouTube page. Rich does a tremendous job talking about margin protection and what that does for your producers and how that works. Enough about margin protection. We're going to get into a little bit about the ins and outs of SCO first. Like I said before, this will be a pretty high level overview of how the policy works. This policy has been out for several years now, so I'm assuming that most of us know the ins and outs of this policy. But what is SCO? SCO is an area-based plan, so it's a county-based plan that is a band from your multi-peril coverage level up to 86%. And so whatever coverage level you chose on your multi-peril, SCO would cover you from that coverage level up to 86% on a county level basis. It is an endorsement to your individual policy and then matches the individual coverage. So if you have revenue protection on your policy, then SCO will work like a revenue policy. If you have yield protection, then SCO would work like a yield policy. You must purchase that SCO and your underlying policy with the same AIP. And then the tricky part and the interesting part about this is that the liability or the maximum payout that you can receive on SCO is based on your expected crop value for that individual grower. And so if you're a better farmer than everyone else in the county, then you possibly could have a higher liability on your SCO policy than your neighbor, for example. But I want to point out that the amount paid is based on how well the county does. So the county, again, it is a county-based policy. So even though your value, your liability is based on your individual farmer, the payout is going to be based on whether the indemnity is going to be based on whether or not the county experienced a loss. The reason why SCO is extremely attractive, one, we talked about the prices, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the other big part about SCO is that it is extremely highly subsidized by the government. It's a 65% subsidy. It's regardless of the coverage level of the underlying policy. So that 65% is for the revenue side, if you bought a revenue protection policy and revenue policy on SCO. The biggest part that's always been the hardest thing for SCO is that the producer cannot have SCO and ARC on the same field. And a lot of times we're making this purchase of SCO before the farmer goes into the FSA office to choose PLC or ARC. And so there does cause some problem with that. But again, I want to point out that you cannot have SCO and ARC on the same field. If the producer is going to buy SCO, you as an agent need to remind them that then they need to enroll in PLC at the FSA office instead of ARC. The biggest difference, in my mind, SCO and ARC both go up to 86% of a coverage. However, SCO pays on planted acres, whatever they planted this year, while ARC only pays on 85% of whatever base acres they have on their at the FSA. This next bullet point, it's a lot of words, but I'm just going to kind of ad lib here a little bit that SCO payments are determined by the county average, and it is possible for you to experience a loss on your individual farm and not receive an SCO payment. Again, it is a county level policy. It goes off the county experience, not your individual experience. So the farmer could experience a loss, receive a payment on their revenue policy, and still not get an SCO payment, or vice versa. They could have a great year on their own farm and still receive an SCO payment. And then the other thing to point out about SCO is that the payment does occur later. Typically for wheat, we get the final yields from the RMA around April 16th of the following crop year. And so that is when the RMA will determine the final county yield. And then any SCO payments would be paid out early summer, typically around that May-June timeframe as we go through the year.
On his MP, he doesn't show any soybean. Yeah.
Take a look at a little example of how SCO works. You can see on the left here, you have your individual policy in the orange color. In this example, they purchased a 75% policy. Actually, they purchased an 80% policy. And then on the right, you can see where SCO goes from 86 to 80% and covers you on a county level basis on that area there. So if you purchased a 65% policy, then your SCO revenue would go from 65% to 86%. So you would have a higher band on the SCO policy. So we're going to move on here from SCO and talk about ECO, Enhanced Coverage Option. Enhanced Coverage Option was new in 2021. One thing that we're extremely proud of here at NAU Country is that Jim Corn, the president of our company, along with Watts and Associates, were very instrumental and key in developing this policy and getting this policy offered through the RMA. It is a product that gives you up to 95% coverage level on a county level basis. And part of the reason why this policy is out there is because there was a lot of individual policies, non-subsidized policies that were floating around the industry. And this is a policy that you can get a subsidy on and get you the coverage that you need, getting up to 95% coverage and giving those farmers true protection and a true shallow loss type of program. So if you're familiar with SCO, you'll understand ECO, all the same concepts. It is a county level policy and area-based coverage. The band for ECO goes from 86% up to either 95% or 90%, whichever one you choose. Again, it is an optional endorsement to your policy, and it does match the individual coverage. So again, if you purchased a revenue protection policy, ECO would work like a revenue policy. If you purchased a yield policy, a YP policy, then ECO would work on a yield basis. It is not impacted by your PLC or ARC decisions like SCO. You can purchase ECO and have ARC. The concept behind that is that obviously ARC goes to 86% and ECO begins at 86%. So ECO is not impacted by your PLC or ARC decisions that you make at the FSA office. Another great selling point with ECO is that it is subsidized at 44%, so a high subsidy for this policy. Great opportunity for producers out there. Just a little example of how ECO works. On the left, we're looking at a 95% ECO policy. You can see the top part, the deductible where you would have no coverage would be from 100 to 95%. And then your ECO range goes from 95% down to 86%. The middle one here in the yellow says SCO or ARC coverage range. I've talked a little bit about that, where ARC goes up to 86%, which is an election you can make at the FSA office. ECO or SCO also goes from your multi-peril coverage up to 86%. So you can pick one or the other. You can't pick both. And then your multi-peril, your individual coverage would be whatever multi-peril policy that you purchased. In this example, 75%. So SCO would go from 75 to 86%, and then ECO from 86 to 95%. Same thing on the right. It's just at a 90% ECO policy. You would have the deductible of 10% from 100 to 90% on your operation, and then ECO would kick in. I do want to point out here, we typically get this question every single year. Do you have to purchase SCO to purchase ECO? And the answer to that is no. You could have a gap in this coverage right here. You could just buy your multi-peril to 75% and then buy ECO from 86 to 95%. And then you could enroll in ARC at the FSA office or PLC, whichever you choose, and have a gap in your coverage in that middle band there in the yellow. So I did want to point that out to everyone. So now that we've talked about just kind of the ins and outs, I just wanted to bring up this chart again on this is just KC July wheat for 23, where we're looking at it at the current projected price at 865. So a tremendous opportunity for 2023 when you look at what that 95% coverage would get you on a price trigger of $8.22, over $1.14 higher than where we even had a projected price this past year for hard red winter wheat in the for 2022. So tremendous opportunity for farmers to lock in a high level of coverage, get themselves in a situation where they would be at a potential profit for their operation and lock in some prices. And again, I look at these policies a lot of times as, from my marketing background, as a put option. You really have a price floor at $8.22, and so you still have upward price protection when it comes with your multi-peril policy, because prices will reset and your revenue will reset. Same way with your ECO or SCO. So now that we've gone through some of the ins and outs of the policies, like I said, a very high level. If you have specific questions on how the policy works, I'd encourage you to reach out to your underwriter or your marketing rep, and they will be able to help answer those questions. But we're going to talk a little bit for the rest of the time about some of the tools that we have available, some tremendous tools to show and to illustrate to your producers how these policies work, and what the advantage and the value of these policies are. So we're going to start off in our quoting system, our Easy Quote system. The first thing, this is the screen that pops up when you go into Easy Quote. In this example, I just am going to run a generic scenario for a farmer, for a prospect. If you have a customer, the difference is you're going to click on this open and search for your customer and pull in his yield history. But for right now, we're going to click on MPCI. It pulls up this screen where I put in all of my parameters. I put in my state. In this example, I live in Kansas, so I ran this example for Kansas. Washington County, Kansas is the example I ran. But regardless of where you live, the policy works the same. It's just a matter of the numbers may be a little bit different. Picked my crop, which is wheat. I picked revenue protection, non-irrigated, and I selected, I'm going to choose an 80% revenue protection policy this year is what I have selected. To look at ECO and SCO, right here in this endorsement area, I just toggled on these two little boxes for SCO and ECO. And then right down here, I want to point out, if you wanted to change your ECO coverage level to 90%, this is where you would do that as well. Put in the rest of the information that I have. If you have a prospect, you could click on this use 10-year APH and then scroll down and enter in their actual 10-year history if you had that available to you. If this was a current customer, all that information will already be in the system and it will pull over when you run this quote. I also want to point out the price and volatility. I ran this just a couple days ago to get this presentation ready, and it was at 8:59. This price and volatility is updated daily. When you go in there to quote, you will have the most updated price and volatility. But again, 8:65 is where we were at as of yesterday afternoon. So the number is going to be a little bit different today. Click on save here, and this is the first screen that's going to pull up, and this is our full farm view. This is going to show me at the top line here, this is my revenue protection policy. My next line is my SCO policy, and then my bottom line here is my ECO policy. So we can look here and we can see what our approved yield is. I added some of these columns in here, and that's one thing that I want to point out to you, is that if you right click at the top on any of these columns, you can go into a column chooser and you can add and remove anything that you want to see or don't want to see. And I wanted to see expected yield, so I added that in here. So I know for Washington County, the expected yield for Washington County wheat for SCO and ECO is 47.6 bushels an acre. You also can go over here and see all of the information on what the net premium is. So this revenue policy at 80% is going to cost me $14.49. SCO is going to cost me $4.46, and ECO $13.80. And so that's a good look at this full farm. From there, I'm going to go over to the scenario tab, and I'm going to take a look at some of the some scenarios that I want to run on my operation. First thing that I like to look at this is that the bar chart at the top is nice to view, easy to see. But the first thing I always look at when I look at any of these types of add-on policies is how much premium to liability ratio am I getting? So if I'm paying in this 80% example here, I'm paying $4.46 for SCO. What am I getting in return for that? And if I look, hit the wrong button. And if I look right down here in my coverage, I can see right here my coverage for SCO is $23.71. Again, that is based on my own farm's individual history, my APH, what that coverage level is going to be. And so for $4.46, I'm receiving $23.71 of liability. And so that's about a 5 1/4, 5 1/3 to 1 liability to premium. And that is a very good product in my mind, again, because it's so highly subsidized. When you look at ECO, $13.80 gives me about $35.56. So that's a little less than 3 to 1. But again, when you look at these products, I always say 4 to 1 liability to premium is a great buy. 3 to 1 can be. Anything below 3 to 1, only if prices are good. And right now, prices are great. And so I do still think that ECO is a tremendous opportunity for farmers this year, just because of where, as I talked about earlier, where our prices are being averaged currently today. Also in here, you can see the blue and the brown. I went up here and added another scenario. And that second scenario I added was ECO at 90%. And because I wanted to see if I didn't want to spend $13.80 on the ECO this year, what would the 90% policy cost me? And so you can see right here very clearly, it's going to cost me $5.73. So if I bought all of these policies together, I'm going to spend $24.68 an acre in this example, in this scenario. So those are a couple of ideas for you here on how to run this. Also, you can see that 75, 80, and 85% are shown here on the right. You can choose what coverage levels you want to show to your producer. If you want to show them only one, or if you want to show them one above, one below, or if you want to show them all of his options, that is available for you right there. And you can add scenarios and look at different things side by side. Another thing in here that I don't know if a lot of people use this, but I like to look at this a lot of times. In the top right here, I clicked this drop down and I chose insurance indemnity. So what now I'm able to look at is what if scenarios. And I can run all sorts of different scenarios. I can change the harvest price. I can change what the individual yield ended up being, or what the county yield ended up being. And so you can slide these bars back and forth and these graphs will change. You can type them in, whatever you want to do, and you can see different scenarios for your producer. In this example, I just had price dropping, yield staying the same, and you can see that where price dropped, that my ECO policy was paying out in those examples, almost maxing out the payment that I would receive on ECO. So you can run all those examples. You can play with this, take a look at it, see what that looks like for your individual producer and for your individual farm. Next, I move over to the historical tab. This is a fantastic way to view how this policy has performed over the last several years. First thing that I want to point out is that you can choose how many years or what years you want to show up here in the top right-hand corner of the page. And for this example, I chose 15 years. I wanted to see how the last 15 years would have performed on this policy. Also, I have chose just to show ECO. So this is right here where you can choose whether to show SCO, ECO, both, or either one. So right now I'm showing ECO at 95%. And you can see historically when this policy would have paid out and how much it would have paid out. Now I have in my bottom right-hand corner, I have net indemnity selected. You could untoggle that and it'll just show you what the gross indemnity would be. So this is above and beyond my premium that I would have paid for this policy. But you can see 6 out of the last 15 years, this policy in this county would have paid. And you can see by how much. Also up here at the top, I like to look at this data. As you scroll down, you can see what these are. But the years that they would have received a payment, I like to look at why did they receive a payment. So I can see what our projected price was, what our final price was, what the expected yield was, and what the final yield was. So I can see, is this a price was this a price payment because price dropped, or is this a yield loss situation that yields dropped? And so in this scenario, price dropped most of the time in 2019, a little bit of yield drop, but not a lot, but we had a drop in price and a drop in yield. And so that's what's triggering my payment. And so I can go back and see this for all the historical years that I want to see out there for this producer. I also want to point out that if this was a policy of ours and you imported all that data when you opened up the quote, if I clicked on plan here, it'll show me what their actual policy and how that would have performed over the historical years. Right now, this is just a prospect, so we're just looking at how this ECO policy would have performed. Next, all I did here is change from 95% to a 90% ECO policy. I would have been paid the same years, obviously, but my amount of payment has dropped considerably in all of those years. But you can see, compare those, how that looks, what that looks like for your producer. Again, I only have that 4% band that I'm being covered on ECO on that county level basis. And so you can clearly show that historically. The one thing I do want to point out with ECO and this historical data is that I've ran 100 of these or more across all sorts of different states and counties. And the one thing that I have found is that every county, every crop, and every practice differ. You can go from one county and move over to the next county, and the historical data is completely different. And you can change from practices, and the data is completely different. And so I do encourage you to do your homework. If you're looking at talking to your producers about these policies this coming sales season, do your homework. Take a look at what these policies do and how they work in different counties, and don't just write them off because the first county you looked at hasn't performed on this policy. So I do want to encourage you that every county, every crop, and every practice is a little bit different, and they interact a little bit different, and just wanted to throw that out there. On this page, I'm still on historical. Now I'm in SCO. All I did was I toggled off ECO, and now I'm showing just SCO, and you can see historically what SCO policy would have been paid, and you can see why. Again, very same example. It's paid for the last 15 years. And this example, I'm going from 86%, and I have selected 80% on my policy. And so that's showing me the net indemnity of that policy for the last 15 years. And then finally, I have both ECO and SCO selected, and I can go back and look historically how this would have worked and what this looks like. And I do want to point out, Kurt just put out there on the chat that remember, when using this historical data, only the last 3 years have used the crop insurance data. Before that, it was NAS data. So that is a very good point to bring up, because now we're using RMA data to establish final yields and what those payments will be that we've been doing here for the last 3 years. So the last thing I want to show on this historical data is the yield tab. So all I've done is toggled on the yield over here, and I can see historically what the county yield has done in this county, and then where my 86% trigger, which is the yellow line, this is my SCO policy, and then the green line would be my 86 to 95% trigger for ECO. And you can see historically when this county has performed under what those triggers would have been. And you can see this county over the last several years, we can see that it's had some years where we were below what those triggers were, where we've had some pretty bad years. If you had a producer in here and their data, you can track their yields compared to the county yields. And it's just like any policy. I always say when a producer tracks what the county is doing, for the most part, then they're a good candidate for a county level policy. If they're consistently above or consistently below or consistently at what the county is doing, then they're a very good candidate for any county level policy out there. But if you had the producer's information in here, it'll chart that on here with it, and you can see how that producer lines up with the county. So now I want to move into another fantastic tool that we have available to show how SCO and ECO work. And this is called our Supplemental Coverage Option and Enhanced Coverage Option Indemnity Worksheet. This is an Excel worksheet that is available on our agent portal. If you go onto our agent portal under resources, it's about halfway down through the drop down here, and you click on SCO ECO Indemnity Worksheet, and this will bring up an Excel worksheet that you can play with. There are different tabs at the bottom where you can go through this worksheet. You can see the expected yield list for every county and every crop. You can find all that data right in this Excel worksheet. But I do want to encourage you that this worksheet is protected, so you can't really break it. And it is an Excel sheet, but all of the yellow boxes are the boxes that you would enter in information. The rest of the boxes are protected on this screen. And so you can't break it. You can play around with scenarios. You can do all sorts of different things and find different examples. In this scenario, what I did is I put our base price at $8.59, and I have the harvest price dropping to $7.50. My farm yield is 46 bushels. That's my APH. Times the higher of these two, so times 859. So my expected crop value is $395. I have a band in this scenario of 86 to 95%, so I'm showing just ECO on this scenario. So I have a 9% coverage band. And so I take my expected crop value times that coverage, and I end up with my protection level of $35.56. And so that is my ECO liability, how much ECO payment I could possibly get when I max out this payment of $35.56. Down here, you put in the county information. The expected county yield for this county I ran was 47.6. I just said that the county yield stayed the same. And so my county yield is 47.6. The final county revenue was $357 an acre, when my expected county revenue was $409. And so we only ended up with 87.3% of our expected revenue. And as you go down here, we go through the payment factors. So I had a 95% coverage level. We only produced 87.3% of it. So we had a 7.7% loss. Divide that by our 9% coverage band. And so our indemnity factor was 85.6%. We take our protection level that we calculated from our own APH times 85.6%, and that gives you our potential indemnity of $30.44. And so this is a great way to run through some of the scenarios, different ways that this policy will pay out. You can, like I said before, you plug in numbers in the yellow boxes and it'll calculate right there for you. You scroll down just a little bit and you will find an indemnity matrix, and you can see very clearly when and where I would receive an indemnity based on what the county yield does at the top and what the price does for harvest price. So if I ended up here at 40.1 bushels and the price goes to $7.52, I would max out my payment of $35.56. And you can see very clearly when you wouldn't get a payment and when you would get a payment. So very handy chart to have printed out and go over with your producers. In this scenario, same scenario as before, but all I did was change to a 90% ECO policy. So I have a 4% band. Notice that my protection went down to $15.81. So we were at $35. Now we're at $15 by dropping that band down to 90%. So same scenario, same county yield. We ended up with only a $10.67 indemnity versus a $30.44 indemnity. So that you can see, you can show how those different policies and coverage levels work together side by side, so you can compare them as you're looking through this. In this scenario, I had price going up to $9 at harvest time, and then I had my final county yield dropping to 35 bushels an acre. And you can see here, because price went up, my expected protection, my protection level went up as well because my expected crop value increased to $414. In this scenario, price went up, but yield dropped. So I have an indemnity on this ECO policy of $37.26. And again, with a 90% policy, just showing what that difference is between those two coverage levels, you can show that as well. A couple more examples on this chart here, on this indemnity worksheet. If I want to show just SCO, what I would do is make my coverage level 80% and then my top coverage trigger at 86%. This will show me just that SCO policy and how that would work in given scenarios. So I have a 80% revenue policy, so I have a 6% band that SCO is covering me on, and you can see my protection. You can run the scenarios. In this example, price dropped and yield dropped, and so I would receive my max payment on that .SCO policy. And then lastly, I want to show how SCO and ECO work together. And so in this scenario, what I've done is I've had my revenue coverage at 80% and then my top trigger at 95%. So I have SCO from 80 to 86 and then ECO from 86 to 95%. So I have a total protection of $29.57. And in this scenario, price dropped, yield dropped, and we ended up with an indemnity of $59.27. Again, here's another example of a matrix showing you with the SCO and ECO together when payments would be triggered and how often and how much there are. So the last thing I want to point out about some of the things we have available within our training tab of our agent portal, if you go down to tips and tricks, you can find our ECO option training suite. There's a lot of great information that Hope and her team have put together, from a product overview, some user guides to how to quote and show some of this stuff in there. There's also an SEO fact sheet and information in this as well. But a great training resource for you if you're looking for information, if you're trying to figure out how to do something. I encourage you to go into our agent portal under the tips and tricks, and you will find all sorts of information out there for you to find. One more thing I want to point out is Rich Morrison does a lot of great information, puts out a lot of great information for our agents and our producers. Here's a list of some of the things that he has available: the opening bell call, the market report, where you're going to find all of the projected prices and all sorts of information. I know he said in the next week he's going to put out a letter on SCO and how that works and what his thoughts are on that. So we'll be looking forward to seeing that on his market report coming up. Also, the aftermath webinar that he does the day after the USDA reports are released. Great resource for you out there. And if you are a podcast listener or a Twitter person, he is out there on both of those as well, doing those things. So I just wanted to give a little shout out on that. Couple final thoughts I have on both of these. Every county crop and practice is different. So like I said before, make sure you do your homework. Don't write off a policy because it may not work in one county that you looked at. Look at all the counties around your area. Make sure that you understand what this policy does, how it works, and if it's a good fit for your producer. I'm guessing that everyone on this webinar has either sold one of these policies or has a producer or two that these policies would fit for. And so again, I encourage you to do your homework, make sure you understand. And as I showed you before, another reason why to understand these policies is because these policies are taking off. Agents are selling them across the country. And if you don't understand the policy and if you aren't explaining it to your agent or to your producer, another agent might come in the door and take that customer away from you. So just be prepared, understand how the policy works. Producers may purchase SCO and ECO together, but they can leave a gap in coverage if they wish. So I do want to point that out again. Again, these policies are extremely highly subsidized. And when you can get up to 95% coverage with the prices that we have today, that's a great opportunity to lock in a high level price, lock in potential profit for your farm as well. Again, they're county based, so those especially good for those producers that have a yield history that's as good or better than the county, or at least matches the county. If they follow along what the county trend is, then they're a very good fit for these policies. It only takes a 5% loss in revenue to trigger an indemnity, so a great opportunity to have a shallow loss policy that will help us lock in some high projected high prices and high floors. So again, that's with the high projected prices, you have to look at these policies and what they do for you going forward. So that's all I have today on ECO and SCO. I hope you learned something from this or took away something to think about. My information is on the screen here. My email, kane.adams@naucountry.com. My cell phone. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to chat with you about it. I'd love to hear from folks because when I get questions, sometimes it helps me learn as well. So my information is out there. But again, thank you for joining us today. And with that, I will leave you with the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.